There is a bus shelter somewhere near you. Glass panels, a metal frame, a bench maybe, a roof that keeps most of the rain off, the glass is intact, someone replaces it when it breaks. Now answer a simple question: who paid for it? The obvious answer is the city. It sits on a public sidewalk at a public bus stop serving public transit. The obvious answer is usually wrong. In a lot of American cities, the city did not buy that shelter. It did not install it. It does not clean it, and it does not repair it. And it is not spending money on it. It is being paid for it. New York City signed a 20-year deal in 2006 covering thousands of new shelters, along with public toilets and newsstands. Over the life of that agreement, the city expected to collect somewhere in the region of $1.5 billion. Philadelphia signed a 20-year deal guaranteeing the city a minimum of roughly $52 million. Los Angeles restructured its arrangement in 2022 and moved from taking about 20% of advertising revenue to taking about 60%, with a guaranteed floor of $90 million. None of those cities paid to build the shelters. So who did? And why would anyone build a bus shelter for free? Look at the shelter again and notice what is actually on it. At one end facing the street, there is an advertisement, sometimes at both ends, sometimes backlit so it glows at night. That advertisement is not there to offset the cost of the shelter. It is the reason the shelter exists, because the shelter was not built by a transit agency. It was built by an outdoor advertising company. The arrangement is called a street furniture contract, and that is the actual industry term. It works like this. A city has bus stops. Most of them are just a pole and a sign. Building proper shelters is expensive. In Boston, the transit agency put the cost of a standard shelter at around $40,000 to buy and install, plus about $7,000 a year to maintain and clear of snow. Multiply that by a few thousand stops and you have a number no city budget is going to absorb. So an advertising company makes an offer. We will build the shelters. We will install them, clean them, replace the broken glass, and maintain them for the next 15 or 20 years. You pay nothing. In exchange, we get the exclusive right to sell advertising on them, and we will pay you a share of what we earn with a guaranteed minimum. From the city's side, that is close to free money. It gets infrastructure it could not afford, maintenance it does not have to staff, and a revenue line instead of a cost line. Councils approve that. Almost every large city does it this way. One company citywide for 2 decades. Denver is one of the few American cities that runs it differently, letting multiple companies bid stop by stop. Now look at it from the advertising company's side. Here is where most people guess wrong, including me before I looked into it. You would assume a bus shelter ad is expensive space. Prime position, eye-level, captive audience. It is the opposite. Measured by cost per 1,000 people who see it, transit shelter advertising is one of the cheapest formats in the business. Industry surveys have put it at the very bottom of the range at a couple of dollars per 1,000 impressions against something like $45 for primetime television. So the value is not in charging a lot per shelter. The value is in 2 other things. The first is attention. A billboard gets a second and a half through a windshield. A bus shelter ad gets somebody who is standing still, has nothing to do, and will be there for the next 8 minutes. Industry research puts recall rates for shelter advertising far above most other outdoor formats. The second is volume. The business only works at scale, thousands of panels sold cheaply across an entire city for 20 years. And that combination is what determines where the shelters go. Because if you are selling cheap advertising by volume, the only question that matters when citing a shelter is how many people will see the panel, not how many people are waiting for a bus. Those are different questions, and they produce different maps. We know they produce different maps because somebody measured it. 2 researchers at UCLA studied how bus shelters were being distributed in Los Angeles and published the results in 2001. What they found was that placement was driven principally by the advertising revenue a shelter could generate, secondarily by political pressure over geographic fairness, and only marginally by how many people actually used the stop. One of those researchers, Brian Taylor, later explained the mechanism in a way that is hard to forget once you have heard it. Advertising companies want shelters on busy streets, but at stops where relatively few people are waiting. Because a crowd of people standing at a bus stop blocks the view of the advertisement. Read that again. The ideal shelter commercially is one that not many people are using. Nobody has to be cynical for this to happen. The company is doing exactly what its contract rewards. But the consequence is that the shelter tends to arrive where the traffic is heavy and the queue is short, which is roughly the opposite of where shelter is needed. Now, the honest picture of who ends up without one is more complicated than I expected, and I want to give it to you straight rather than tidy. Start with the scale of the gap. The Washington Post looked at more than 135,000 bus stops across 17 of the largest American transit agencies. Fewer than 1 in 5 had a shelter. In Boston, the figure was around 8% of stops. In Los Angeles, only about a quarter of stops have any shade at all. Then look at who is standing at them. A bus stop census of San Francisco, published in 2022, found that the routes with the longest waits between buses tended to have the least seating and the least shelter. The riders facing 40-minute gaps were the ones most likely to be standing in the open. Heat makes that concrete. Researchers in Houston measured shade at bus stops and found shaded spots ran several degrees cooler than unshaded ones, and that badly designed shelters, the kind that cast no useful shadow, could actually make the wait hotter. And the people affected are not a random slice of the public. Bus ridership skews heavily toward people without a car. In Los Angeles, the median household income of a bus rider is under $18,000. So far, this all points one direction. But here is where I have to be careful, because the evidence does not line up as neatly as the argument wants it to. That same San Francisco census found no meaningful relationship between a neighborhood's income and whether its stops had shelter. A separate study across 20 smaller American cities found more shelters in denser and more heavily minority neighborhoods, not fewer. So the clean version, poor neighborhoods get nothing, rich neighborhoods get glass, is documented in Los Angeles and does not hold everywhere. And advertising value is not the only thing driving placement. A shelter needs a wide enough sidewalk, it needs to meet accessibility rules, it needs permits, and it needs the property owner next door not to object. Los Angeles is the clearest case of exactly that. Its shelter program did not fail because a company sat on its hands. It failed partly because getting a single shelter approved ran through a 16-step permitting process, and because residents in some neighborhoods actively fought having advertising installed on their streets. The result was that of nearly 1,300 shelters promised, only about half got built. Hundreds of stops that were supposed to be covered never were, and the city's own auditor estimated tens of millions in expected revenue simply evaporated. The city controller described it as a case study in what not to do, which brings us to the thing these contracts really do to a city. Not a trap exactly. A dependency. The company's payment to the city is calculated on a certain number of advertising faces. Reduce the faces and the city's guaranteed money goes down with them. That mechanism is written explicitly into these agreements. New York's digital kiosk franchise says outright that if fewer structures get permitted, the company's guaranteed minimum shrinks accordingly. So a city that decides a particular shelter should not carry advertising is deciding to be paid less. And at the end of the term, the shelters do not belong to the city. In one British council's own documents, the operator made clear it would remove every shelter if the contract were not renewed. 20 years of infrastructure and the city can wake up one morning to a row of empty concrete pads. The same model now covers more than shelters, advertising benches, information kiosks, public toilets, bike share docks, freestanding digital screens on sidewalks. New York's digital kiosk program promised 7,500 of them at no cost to taxpayers. A state audit found roughly 2,000 built, and the missing ones concentrated outside Manhattan in the areas least well served to begin with. Now the counterpoint, because there is a real one. Without these deals, a lot of these shelters would not exist at all. Boston's transit agency has said as much. Houston's has said outfitting every stop is not financially feasible. When a shelter costs $40,000 to install and $7,000 a year to keep up, and a private company will do it for nothing, a rider standing in the dry does not much care who owns the panel beside them. The model delivers something real. But it is not the only option, and it is worth knowing that. Portland's transit agency owns and maintains around 1,000 of its own shelters. It is not advertising funded, it works. So the problem is not that advertising money is dirty. The problem is narrower, and it is worth stating precisely. When public infrastructure is paid for by advertising, the infrastructure goes where the advertising works. Sometimes that lines up with where people need it. There is no reason to expect it to. So the next time you are standing under a bus shelter, look at what is holding it up and look at what is filling the end panel. You are standing inside a privately owned advertising structure that the public is permitted to use. The roof is real, the glass is real, the bench is real. But it was not put there because someone decided you deserved to be dry. It was put there because a company worked out that you standing still for 8 minutes with nothing to look at is worth about $2 per 1,000 of you. That is the hidden business behind bus shelters, not transit infrastructure with an advertisement on it. An advertisement with a roof on it.